Oxford from the inside. The good, the bad, but always the truth.
Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Oxford from the Inside, the good, the bad, but always the truth. I'm Nikita, and I'm going to be helping to manage the podcast this year. And today I'm joined by Hannah Louise Siddiqui, who you might remember from some of the episodes that we've released over the summer holidays. And yeah, Hannah, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Hannah. I graduated from Worcester College with a degree in music in 2022, and I've been sort of helping on the managerial side of the podcast. So it's really exciting to be on the other end and to be interviewed. Yes, and I will be heading to do a master's at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland in a week or so. So that's a little bit about me there.
Great. Thank you so much for joining me today. We're going to be talking about writing a personal statement for music. So I guess to start with, the million-dollar question, how did you go about writing your personal statement? Did you maybe start with a plan? Did you go through several drafts? Would you be able to maybe talk us through a little bit like the process?
Yeah, so I think I went through around 8 drafts, which is a lot. I was very pedantic. Obviously, you don't have to do 8 drafts. That's just what I did. You might do less, you might do more. It's just how you feel. And I started off by reading bits of books and recent news articles on music. And I made notes, just a few pages of A4 for the things that I read. And I also looked at the course content and saw, am I really interested in any of these things? Can I do a bit of background research or just sort of find an article on it? So sort of looking at where my interests aligned in the course. And then I went and I listed all my experiences that I'd had in music and the skills that they'd given me. So for instance, like I did a lot with Oldham Music Centre. I was in a youth orchestra, and I would put that, being in youth orchestra helped me with sort of collaborative things, playing as part of a group, resilience as well, sort of tackling challenging material, obviously like musicianship and interpreting, so that sort of thing. So I did my experience and then skills that I'd gained from that. And then with that knowledge, so I just sort of wrote everything down that I'd done for the past 3 years or so before before applying to uni. And then I just splurged essentially. So I vomited it all on a page, not very nice imagery, but I just sort of wrote what I could in any way that would link my experiences, my skills, and my interest in music. So I would try and link my experiences to maybe something I'd read or a news article. So just sort of trying to find some way that all those things would link into a coherent paragraph or coherent statement. And I ended up with way too much, absolutely like over the character limit. So it was tricky, like trying to narrow down what to put in and sort of what experiences to choose and what books to talk about. So I sort of narrowed it down to be slightly more general in terms of my examples. So whereas in my earlier drafts, I'd mentioned that I was in Oldham Music Centre, I played in their youth orchestra, I played in their string group, I played in their choir, and I'd put all those 3 in my personal statement. I just said I narrowed that down to I played in various ensembles at Oldham Music Centre. So I still sort of referenced the examples, but it was a lot more general, and that helped me cut out some words. And then I also got feedback from family and friends, teachers, anyone who would read it. And it also helped me cut out certain things. For instance, if I'd used like excess words in a sentence, I'd use like too many connectives. It really helped sort of the itty gritty bits and sort of narrowing the words down. That really helped. So that was generally what I did.
Great. I think what you mentioned at the end there about getting feedback on personal statements and getting people to read it over, be it friends, family, teachers. that's a really useful point, because so often like we become so engrossed in the personal statement and we craft it very lovingly, and then we maybe have a tendency to perhaps skip over little mistakes or things, places where it might not flow as well. So I think that's some really good advice there.
Yeah, definitely. I know I was a bit dubious about giving it to other people, because I was like, this is my work. I've worked so hard on it. It's like my sort of baby in a way. And it was really useful getting secondary opinions and a different perspective. So I would recommend that.
Great. You've kind of touched on it a little bit already, but is there a particular theme you'd apply to each section in terms of ordering the personal statement? Like, would you tend to put extracurricular stuff towards the end, or would you tend to intersperse it throughout?
So first of all, the order of your personal statement is entirely up to you. So what I'm suggesting is just what I did. It's in no way saying this is how you should do it. So I guess I would start with something that says a bit about music and how you interpret it, and then link that to like why you want to study at university. So saying that studying at university would enhance or perhaps even challenge your perspective that you've just stated. So I hope you don't mind if I read an example out from the start of my personal statement, which is, quote, "Personally, music is something that evokes immensely polarized emotions and interpretations. It provides cultural and empathetic insights into diverse societal interactions. Studying music at degree level would therefore present a prime opportunity to further discover music's greater perspectives and technical applications." So just sort of saying something about how I view music and what studying music at degree level would do. And then generally I would do my experiences, followed by the skills, and then sort of follow that by documenting any questions that came into my head when I was doing these experiences, or any debates that I was thinking of. And then if possible, I backed that up by a bit of reading. So as an example, I said, performance in local folk clubs was an experience that I had, and that helped skills in interpretation, improvisation, teamwork, and sort of discussing like sort of how people use folk. And that led me to talk about debates about folk and nationalism, and folk and sort of political. It was used in a lot of working class circles. So I sort of, talked about my experience, linked that to reading as well, and to how it affected my perspective. So from debates about folk, I then linked this to some reading I'd done about a classification of art into higher and lower circles, and saying that's quite rigid, and actually folk can transcend, and it can be used in high art, so like classical music, art music, folk can permeate into that. So that's the general sort of experience thing that I did, and I did about 3 to 4 of those experiences. I then did a short bit about career aspirations, and referenced an article that I had read, just a sort of BBC article that was like a 5-minute read, not an entire volume of a book. So just referenced a short news article, and that sort of gave me a direction as to where the degree might take me in the future. And then finally at the end, I did a baby paragraph, so a couple of sentences of non-music extracurricular activities. So that was I just wanted to include it in because I know that other unis are more sort of accepting of extracurricular activities that aren't related to your subject. So I still put that in, but I had it just at the end, sort of as an add-on, and that's sort of how I structured it. Yeah.
Great, thank you for that insight, and particularly for sharing that quote with us from your own personal statement. I just want to pick up on what you said about the extracurriculars. So it's often said that Oxford or Oxbridge in general don't really care about your extracurriculars. And so you said that you had your baby paragraph for in order to kind of tailor your application to the other 4 universities that you were applying to at the time. And so I'm interested to find out, does this kind of rule about not really putting too many extracurriculars kind of not apply as much to music, just because so much of the subject is, like, so much of your musical education is formed in extracurricular context, be it like choirs or orchestras or composition that you might be doing outside of school?
That's a really good question. And first of all, I just want to add that not all Oxford tutors are so cold and uncaring. Like, I'm sure they are interested in what you do as well and what you do as a person. It's just simply a matter of practicality, is in that they can't read everything in really big detail, and they're reading like hundreds and maybe even thousands of personal statements. So it's not that they don't care, it's just that they're human too, and they need to focus on academic things because they've just got so much to read. So I just wanted to put that out there, and that they do,
good point.
like, they're not inhuman and they're not cold. But yes, they're definitely not viewed as being as important as the academic stuff. However, for music, I would argue that extracurricular activities become supercurricular. So they're essentially like broadening your knowledge of your subject. So you can use them as like supercurricular things. I would recommend essentially like not just using extracurriculars in a supercurricular way without backing it up to reading. So don't think that because I play in an orchestra, you know, I can get away without reading a book. I'd say a good mix of both is provides a good balance and shows like a diverse range of skills, and that you can read academically, because a lot of the degree is about that essentially. Yeah, and non-music extracurriculars as well, you don't have to put them in. You can if you want, but I linked my non-music extracurriculars back to transferable skills, which would help me with my degree. So that's one way of doing it. Like I said, you know, I go running, and that, you know, the endurance and the sort of mental strength that you get from running can be transferred to, you know, like writing an essay or stuff like that. But just making that link is really helpful.
Right, I think that's a really good way of putting it, the fact that the extracurriculars almost can be used as supercurriculars and integrated in that way. Talking about supercurriculars more generally, are there any particular books or articles or podcasts that you'd recommend for anyone maybe thinking about doing music at university who doesn't really know where to start?
Yeah, so I would say that the good news is about music is that you can make any book that you read on it or any news article relevant as supercurricular reading. Even like looking at your playlist on Spotify could be supercurricular if you're thinking about it. And things I would recommend as well is there's a book called Music: A Short Introduction by Nicholas Cook, and that gives you a really good insight into some of the debates about musicology, which is essentially like the study of music, and like history of music and musical periods, stuff like that. I would also say Guardian Music, they have a section that's really good. You get a lot of very cool and interesting articles in there. BBC Music Magazine, and just generally like BBC articles online, they're really good, and they're digestible as well. They're not like turgid academic language, so you can really get to grips with them. Online lectures as well. So university like subject pages, they might have resources and videos on their websites. So maybe see if a university local to you has anything going on, or any talks that you can go to either online or in person. One thing I would recommend is Torch Humanities, which is the Centre for Research at Humanities Research at Oxford. They have a YouTube channel, and they do a lot of cool music stuff on there, and other humanities stuff. So that's a really good website or video series to watch. Another YouTuber who's really good is Adam Neely. He is really good at breaking down debates and making them, again, digestible, easy to understand. He did one about this debate in a type of analysis called Schenkerian analysis. And there was this one scholar that said it's essentially this really like privileged frame of looking at music, and it prioritizes like the white male in the way that it looks at music and the music that it looks at. So that's a really interesting video. So check out Adam Neely's stuff. And finally, I would say BBC Radio 3, not just for the music, but for some of the talks as well. They have a lot of music historians, musicologists that go on to the radio to talk about their research. And that can be a really good way of finding out what's sort of happening in current academic circles.
Great, thank you so much for all of those recommendations. It's a good thing to remember that there's so many different mediums that you can use to advance your supercurriculars, be it books, articles, podcasts, YouTube videos, talks that you go to. So yeah, don't think that you just have to like sit and read book upon book in order to include them on your personal statement.
Yeah, definitely. There's so much, and what I love about music is that it's really broad. So, you know, you can talk about classical music if you want, but you can also talk about pop, you can talk about folk, you can talk about hip hop. There's just such a broad scope. So it's really, really good. And you can add your sort of your interests and the music that you like really easily.
Great. Now, moving on to kind of the later stages of the application process, I'd be interested to hear about your experiences at interview. Was your personal statement discussed at all?
That is a really good question, because, you know, sometimes you hear stories of like, oh yeah, they didn't even ask me anything. So firstly, I'll just mention that I was interviewed at Worcester, which was where I ended up, and also St Anne's and St Hilda's. So I wasn't asked about my personal statement in the Worcester interview, but in Anne's and Hilda's one, because that was joint, I did get asked. So I sort of got asked, firstly, indirectly, which was the question, what sort of music do you listen to? And I talked about, you know, the genres that I liked. So I could tell that they had read it and they were wanting more sort of specification on like particular artists. So that was a sort of way that they indirectly incorporated elements of my personal statement into the interview. And then I directly got asked about a composer that I'd put in my personal statement. So a female composer, when talking about their music not having much recognition and, you know, our knowledge of music being dominated by male composers. So they might ask you to just develop on things that you mentioned in your personal statement. So they do read it, and yes, make sure you know your personal statement and you have done research on like anything you mention, any name. Yeah, that's my advice.
Great, yeah, I definitely support that word for word. So do make sure you've read any books or articles or things that you've mentioned. Any claims that you make sure you can justify them. Because yeah, as Hannah said, the tutors do read them. And they may pick up on certain points that you make, not to catch you out, because they're interested in you and what you think.
Yeah, definitely. And as I mentioned earlier, the tutors are human. You know, they're not these cold-faced, you know, masks. They're interested in music and they want to speak with people who are interested in music as well. So just sort of, if you approach the whole thing with that mindset, it becomes a lot less scary. Yeah.
Definitely. And on that note, I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. We've learned some really interesting stuff, and thank you so much, Hannah, for sharing your experiences with us and for joining us at Oxford from the Inside, and best of luck with your masters as well. Also, big thank you to our followers for listening to this podcast or watching this YouTube video. Remember to follow us on Instagram at Oxford from the Inside for regular updates on our new content. I hope you all stay safe and well, and until next time, bye-bye.